All right, so Travis actually gave a pretty good introduction, so I won't spend time on this, especially since we need to shave off a couple minutes towards the end of this. If you didn't catch, me, he gave a pretty good introduction. What's relevant here, I guess, is WebRTC hacks. Actually, a couple guys on the panel here provided guest posts and things. I hope to get more from Dan and Anthony in the future for WebRTC hacks, a blog for WebRTC developers. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions today. Actually, it's great because this is some of the sources I go to for questions anyway. And we're going to have a nice interactive discussion with the panel. Travis introduced most of the people here. Varun from CallStats, Dan from Nimble Ape, Robin Raymonds, who hasn't presented today. He's actually been up here in the past, but he's actually chair of the ORTC community group, knows the standards pretty well, and I think hopefully everyone's seen Anthony by now. So we'll run through a few different topics here. I do actually want to give you all a chance to answer questions too, but we'll be covering a lot. Here I picked some lead speakers for some of these topics so they can go into a little bit more depth, and I'll ask the other panelists if you have something else to add, do it. If you don't, we have a lot to cover, so don't feel like you have to speak up, and I'll do my best to make sure everyone gets fair speaking time. So our first topic is really, how's WebRTC adoption going, right? I've heard both sides of this. There's definitely a lot of people, I'd say more in the traditional telephony community, a little frustrated with WebRTC, and then it hasn't done more. And then I see other people who think WebRTC is the greatest thing ever, and their businesses wouldn't exist without it. Here's some stats actually from Google that they gave at Dan's ComCon conference a few weeks ago, right? Showing pretty good remarks, but what does that mean for the community and the group here? And I thought maybe to start this one out, Varun could comment on this. He's got a lot of customers and actually publishes a lot of blog posts and things on different trends he sees. So Varun, maybe you can comment on this one.
WebRTC is awesome. Yeah, so we publish a report which comes out every quarter. We've done 6 versions of it starting early last year. We did 4 last year, we did 2 this. We see a lot of adoption. We have about 800 products use CallStats across the globe. And so I don't know, I think the actual number from Sahi is something around 1,600 to 2,000 products. So we have about 30–40% of that. What we see across the board is, of course, web is where we started. Today, we have a lot more native apps being integrated. We've also seen the move from the web or the browsers to things like Electron or NWJS or similar, because people got a bit wary of the browsers changing every 6 weeks. We've seen all the browsers come on board. Safari is really slow though in adoption.
Right, yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
Well, I'm curious, like Anthony. I mean, specifically within FreeSwitch. I mean, how do you how's the community, your developers responding to WebRTC? You see a lot of people using it.
Yeah, so a lot of the last few years has been very fueled by WebRTC. So we've had, we have a kind of a strange perspective as one of the, there's a couple of us, but, entities that made their own stack, because we already had most of the functionality and we just had, added the final pieces. So we have a different code base that we do interop with than, say, having 2 browsers talk to each other. So terminating calls and stuff. It's become a pretty attractive tool for translating WebRTC into things like SIP and legacy applications and whatnot. So a lot of our development has been driven in that direction because it's, of course, the newest thing, and it's really kind of something that has been changing the most compared to, say, like SIP, which we sort of have had the stable, same kind of stuff going on for many, many years. So the WebRTC is kind of like evolving and standards are changing all the time, and that's causing a lot of people to want to get early adoption to build products and stuff out of it when it comes to finding a platform to do other stuff besides just make calls to each other.
Can you say about what percentage of your time you would say, or you spend on WebRTC versus other things?
Well, I would say that in general, it's kind of a mesh, because now things that we always do also happen on WebRTC, so it's hard to always tell whether or not we're actually working on it or if we're working on the other end of what's happening, say like the video support or whatnot. So, you know, a lot of times, like something we're trying to toy with right now, that's like a project that'll take a while, but you know, since we made our own engine, we were thinking about supporting stuff like the FEC engine that's in the stack. So that everyone else uses the WebRTC.org stack, and we have our own, so it's a little more challenging when something like that comes up. So like making like the red or UPL FEC stuff, actually got to make it rather than just like leverage it. So we've been doing some stuff thinking about doing that. I would say like it's kind of tapered off recently. I think that they found a development cycle in Chrome that's a little less disruptive. It used to be kind of like I'd wake up in the morning and go to call in, because we use the conference kind of the dog food, our own stuff, and we work all day from it. And some days it'd be like, oh, I can't even call. I'm hanging up. I'm restarting my browser. Maybe I'll restart my computer. Maybe I guess I have to pull my camera out. I'll get it eventually. And then, oh, wait, I changed the rules. And like there's a different key length of the encryption or whatever. And so there's a lot less of that, and there's more of kind of stability, I guess, and trying to steer towards the adoption of the stable kind of thing. But we also started using Adapter.js last year, which was something we probably should in the beginning, but you know.
Yeah, that's actually a topic there's a lot we'll cover there. So why don't we break it up a little bit? Just before maybe we move on to some of the browser support and what's going on there. I mean, Robin or Dan, if you guys have any other comments. And just in terms of like how's overall adoption going for WebRTC, and I guess specifically within kind of the more telephony, free switch, you know, open source.
Yeah, so
telecoms.
I can only really say from a workload perspective, for me, my probably 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I don't know, 75% of my time was telephony, and 25% was WebRTC. That telephony might include a little bit of WebRTC. It's completely flipped. 75% to 80% of my time is now WebRTC, completely and utterly.
Was that because you started denying my requests for your help?
Yeah, absolutely. But no, just more and more businesses want soft phones. They want to leverage the technology. It's got to a point where businesses are comfortable putting large amounts of money behind it. Large amounts of money, large amounts of time. So yeah, I can only imagine the numbers are going up and up and up at the moment.
Okay.
He started taking requests from us.
Thanks.
And let's not forget that when we talk about WebRTC, even though the name web is in it, a lot of this is used in native applications, and that's actually I think the majority of the case.
We're going to spend I want to spend a lot of time on that because that's definitely a big area. But maybe before we get into that, Dan, I mean, you come from more of you call yourself a web developer from the browser side. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on the browser side of things? Especially, I mean, certainly Chrome and Firefox have had good support, but I'm very interested in Safari, Edge, if anyone uses that, and maybe you can lead that into also Adapter.js too.
Sure. So if anyone doesn't know what Adapter.js is, it takes all of the proper APIs that are in the standard and normalizes everything that's in each browser. Ideally, we're 7 years in, 6 and a bit, 7, I can't remember the number now. We shouldn't really need this, but we do. So why do we need this? We need this because all of the browsers are still very, very different. But from a web development perspective, do I care? No, because Adapter fixes all of that for me. So Chrome, as Tony was saying, Chrome have kind of got their act together mostly. They still manage to break a couple of things every once in a while, but everyone does. Firefox, similar. Safari, don't get me started on Safari. So Safari say that they are WebRTC, they support WebRTC now, and it's a half-truth. The greatest half-truth in that is they don't support VP8. So when my clients are, say, running an SFU, and up until a certain point, I've got 4 or 5 clients, and they've all joined, and they're all using Chrome or native or whatever, and hey presto, VP8 gets chosen. And that's great. What do I do when someone from Safari joins? Do I start transcoding via an SFU? I shouldn't really be doing that because it's an SFU and you shouldn't really be doing that kind of stuff. Do I force everyone back over to H.264? Do I force everyone onto H.264 at the very beginning?
So yeah, I do want to. Let's hold that one for a little bit, then specific to the video codecs, because
Right.
that's a big one. I especially want to ask Anthony.
So yeah, Safari's kind of crap. Sorry. Edge, again, Edge isn't really WebRTC because it doesn't support the data channel.
Well,
So
I'm curious. I mean, Robin, you don't work for Microsoft, but you were last year. You presented with the Microsoft team, and because of ORTC and Edge's early adoption of ORTC, you're pretty close to that. What were your thoughts on Edge support of WebRTC?
Well, I better not speak on to what
Yeah,
I know about.
I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of Microsoft. I'm asking you to speak on behalf of Robin.
So I know that they know that this is important, and so I can say that
you're referring specifically to the data channel piece,
the
or
data
just in
channel
general?
piece,
Yeah,
and making sure that everything's compatible. And Microsoft, as you can see by, and I'm not speaking for them, but as you can see there by their behavior, they've been very involved in the standardization process, and you can see that they clearly have an interest in making sure that this is standards compliant and having an implementation that works.
but that, as I haven't actually checked recently, to be fair, but the Edge feature thing that they fill out, it's under consideration and has been since the very beginning. To me, that's not, we're going to do it and we really care. As a developer, I want to see more than under consideration, because I know that under consideration really means it's on the bottom of the pile and we'll eventually get to it. So I accept they might really want to do it, but
Yeah,
it annoys me. Because,
As it should.
Yeah, I like to hear Anthony, because it's data channel, but not everyone uses data channel, right? I mean, so Anthony, why don't you go ahead and comment?
So on the Microsoft thing, we were excited when we got to work because, another browser. One thing I would say overall, which is really difficult, is I don't really do that much Windows development. So, and I don't know if, what I'm used to is like this standard that Chrome has set where they have these different tracks. Like you can go on the Canary and you get the newest update every time you turn it on, but on Edge, you have to update the whole Windows to get a new one. So there's like a lot of distance between it. And you can get a developer edition, but then you have to have like a different machine set onto some like pretty hairy versions to be able to, so they only update the browser with the entire operating system. And then Apple's doing the same thing. Like sometimes you can get like this preview version of Safari, and it's so easy, it makes you wonder why you only usually get it once in a while. Like how can Chrome have to update all the time, and Safari only has to update every 6 months? So then it's hard to tell when the changes are there, and then no one ever likes to update. I personally don't want to even reboot my computer, so I end up taking a long time to update. So if you're running the older one, then you're not even getting the fix. Like Safari actually broke audio completely, and that took like 6 months for it to get fixed because like no one ever updates. And you could go to the WebRTC test and it just say no audio like everywhere. I thought it was my problem at first. I'm like, no, they seriously have no audio anymore. So you have to only know sign language. But with as far as what they do, I can relate to some degree because I think that even large companies don't always have, just because they're big doesn't mean the team that works on this stuff is big, and they still make considerations. And I know this from experience, especially having to implement stuff myself, like I was saying, like, is this going to remain? Like, it's a risk. Like, we're talking about implementing the red thing, right? Like, for all we know, they're going to abandon it because they change their mind a lot. So we'll get we'll implement one of these different specs because WebRTC is really a series of specs. such as like the TMMBR to control bitrate, which was a great thing. We got that to work. We were super excited because we can tell the browser like how much bitrate to send, like anytime we want, and it actually listens to us. And they're like, we don't like that. We're using this different way of doing it. And then, that's going to fall into disuse. And so then I think they also try and decide like which way are we going to solve this problem, because this congestion delay thing, which is probably one of your topics too, so I won't get into it, is tricky to decide which one to do. So
Yeah. Well, why don't you, because I know, Varun, you have some stats off the top of your head, because you always do, on browser adoption and what trends are you, I mean, is it still all Chrome and Firefox, or are you seeing anything different?
Mostly Chrome. Yeah. As in, Electron's taken up a lot of space now because people got tired of all these aforementioned things. Firefox is going back and forth. I think it depends on what they actually have in terms of feature support. That also changes with time, because Chrome moves forward and then people... Actually, the bigger thing is apps. Apps don't want to support. Like, I know a lot of people here are saying that they support everything, but it tends to be that you see browser not equal to Chrome. Please download Chrome. So there are a lot of people who just say, please download Chrome. So what ends up...
We as the community did very well at pushing all of our client base and their customers away from iOS and iOS Safari and whatever into Chrome. And now we've suddenly got more choice, and we don't need the more choice because we did such a good job at pushing people into using Chrome or Firefox. Don't get me wrong, there's loads of stuff wrong with Firefox. The fact that I can't set a sync ID as an output device in Firefox is shocking. But we did a really good job, and now we're half paying for it now, I guess.
Yeah, because we forced everyone down Chrome, and now when Chrome breaks stuff, then people are like, oh, you broke stuff. And then we complain why other browsers don't do stuff, because they are now not obligated, because no user is actually telling them to do this, right? So for example, data channel, yeah, it's on the bottom of the pile because they have stuff to do and no one's telling them to do data channels. So if people would get behind on Twitter and say, I want data channels, or start their repos, the issue list, it would happen.
Yeah, well, maybe on the topic of specs, why don't we transition to like the status of WebRTC standardization. Robin, why don't you start there? You've been in that world, and I'll let Vern go next. He's another editor of some of the specs. So.
Sure. I come from the ORTC side of things. So from my world, it's all object-based. And WebRTC started in 2011 and has gone to what we call candidate release twice since then. But they've extended the charter for another 2 years now. And the idea here is to bring as much ORTC in there as they can. And they've already done that. They're about 80% of the way there. And it's all about getting stability and testing going on. They're not really trying to add new features, and they're putting the line in the sand, so to speak, at simulcast. That's the last thing where they want to go. So and to this effort, they've required that unified plan be implemented, and you have to work with RIDs. So these are all mandated features that you must support if you want to be compliant. And so some of the issues that they discovered is that WebRTC is kind of underspecified. Despite having worked on it for about 7 years, there's still a lot that's underspecified, especially with regards to how the objects that they've integrated affect the SDP. Because when you tweak a parameter, you set something, does that cause something to fire now? Does it fire later? How does this all happen in an intelligent way? So there's a lot of issues around that, and the irony is that ORTC actually has a lot of fewer bug lists because we don't have any bugs regarding how this interacts with SDP. That just objects just works. Having said that, there are some things in common in terms of between ORTC and WebRTC in terms of being underspecified. Some of those are to do with encoding parameters. For example, max bitrate. There's a whole bunch of people interpreting what does max bitrate mean, or degradation preferences in unique ways. So you get one implementation does one thing, and then you get a different implementation that does something different, and they really should behave in the same manner. There's also a lot of backward compatibilities issues because they're moving to unified, but a lot of clients still exist that are out there, especially in native implementations that are using older builds, and they do not interoperate anymore. They've got 3 sets of stream APIs, which they started with. They had add stream, then they moved to add track, then add transceiver, and add stream is gone, and add track is deprecated but still there. And so there's the question of what is that going to land into in the final spec. So the real big push now is to create test suites and a test build environment so that each build can be guaranteed against a set areas of suite of tests to make sure that this is actually compliant. And their hope is by the end of the 2-year period that they can have 2 full implementations passing all the test suites by then. I won't talk about future stuff, but because WebRTC is all about standard, and we got a future topic on that anyway.
Which I hope we get to.
We should probably just chime in and say the test suite that's being made is called Kite, and if you don't know what Kite is, it's designed so that it tests all of the APIs against all of the browsers, and that's not something that we've ever really had before. And you could even go and take it yourself and test your application using Kite. So it's kind of this completely awesome thing that I don't want to use the word revolutionize, but revolutionizes how we can really test things within the WebRTC, even ORTC in the future space. I just wanted to say that's what that is.
You get to write your own tests.
Yes.
Yeah. So you wanted an update on the
Well,
specs?
I guess why don't you just add to what Robin said more from
Yeah, so
your,
one of the things that Robin,
more the
one of the things that
ITF side,
So one of the things that Robin said was we are at candidate release. So while it is true that we are at a point where nothing can be added, it's at a point where we can actually remove stuff. So it's also a point to be noted that if 2 browsers do not implement a certain feature, or at least 2 browsers don't implement a feature, and they are not interoperable, it gets removed. So it's also like everyone initially who got onto the WebRTC train and said, hey, do this, my favorite feature thing, and somewhat coerced, let's say, the community into at least standardizing it or writing it into a spec. Now, if there is not sufficient motivation from the browsers because there's not much demand for it from application developers, is at a point where these things will get removed. And there's
I was actually going to mention a few of those items here, so if you don't mind, regarding to exactly what is under consideration. So the identity part of the spec has been removed into its own. It's not dead. It's just been removed and put into its own candidate release cycle, and it's up to the browsers say we want to implement this or not implement this as a separate specification. RTP, RTCP non-muxed is one of those things that might be turfed. The prac and pre-answer have not been well implemented, so that's a kind of feature at risk or weekly supported. And rollback and early media are things that are, again, poorly done, not very well implemented, so those things might be killed as well.
Yay.
Yeah.
There's loads of stuff, there's loads of stuff in there should not have made it in the first place.
Yeah.
Some of those things don't seem possible without signaling also, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe a follow-up question for Dan and Anthony specifically is, well, I mean, there's a lot of specs, there's a lot of stuff in there, but there's also a lot of people that just use frameworks or Verto or something on top of it, and they don't necessarily they don't ever see that, right? And so maybe, like, Anthony, you need to deal with that, but the average developer doesn't. So I guess I'd like your comments on, what's your sense? Are these spec changes, are they a headache for you? Do they matter? How closely you pay attention to that? And then what impact do you think that has on in terms of the products you produce? And
some of them do. Some of them are irrelevant. Like if we, Umberto early media is media to us. Like we can make the concept of free switch early media work. And as far as WebRTC is concerned, there's just media or not. Because it's just a signaling thing. So that's kind of what I think that was the goal. Like why, sometimes I ask why was there no signaling? Like why are you cursing me with this job of having to make my own signaling? But then, you know, there's reasons for it too that are also good. So, you know, some of the other things depends on like how you're going to use it. Like in our case, like data channel almost never makes sense because we've already got like a secure WebSocket signaling channel. which we can send data over, and we've got the media channel. Like there might be something one day, but like we would be driven, if that starts to be an easier thing to use, we might not even have to ever have it. So, or if you have like the some of the cool stuff, we might just want to do because it's fun, like the quick thing. Like quick is fun. Like everyone should get to play with it. So we are impacted, but we usually get a buffer before it comes
we'll
to
talk
get
about
us.
quick. I should say, I know we're going to talk about the quick when we talk about future WebRTC. So we'll explain that for everyone in the audience in a little bit.
So yeah, there's a little bit of it. Sometimes it comes for you like when they went to the Stream API, like what we had before was in peril because even with adapter, you still want to make some changes because if you don't be careful, it comes to get you. You definitely you have to kind of get a warning. They're pretty good about it. Firefox is better at it than anyone else about like complaining in the logs when they're going to get rid of something. Chrome kind of just does it, and but.
Yeah.
I'm sure Chad will end up talking about the current extension fiasco and the new APIs, and that's just going to happen soon. So
You
we'll
mean the
talk about that later.
get display?
Yeah.
Yeah. So just before we move on,
go ahead, and then why don't we actually cover some of those more practical issues with the Get Display Media API, and why don't we cover that in a second? Go ahead,
so
Varun.
before we were going on, I was going to say like my own spec, the Get Stats API went to CR, which is a candidate release like a couple of weeks ago. Well, actually, it's done with so it's in CR, which is awesome because I started 5 years ago on this and it's coming to an end. So
will that become a spec before WebRTC becomes a spec?
you mean 1.0?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so because someone needs to implement all the metrics, or at least some of them, or at least the MTI ones. We have a website called callstats.io/verify that you can go and we kind of list all the metrics that are not yet implemented by the browsers in a way to persuade all the browsers to implement what we want them to implement. But that's, of course, work to be done still. On the IETF side, I'm actually happy that we've not been doing much, as and I stopped going to the IETF since last Chicago meeting. That was like 5 meetings ago, including the one in Montreal past week, which is good because that means the protocol levels have been stable at least for a while, at least most of it, the ones that I care about. I think the other part when we talk about WebRTC, we kind of always talk about the API and don't talk about the protocols, partly because the protocols have been around for 20, 25 years, as in SIP's been around for a while, RTP's been around for a while. But what we forget is that because there were a myriad of telecom companies, they all decided to do their own stuff, and they had their own extensions. And there were all these SPCs that were solving the problem initially about protocol mismatch, right? They were all standards, but they were not, that's one of the problems we have with WebRTC is there are 4 ways of doing something, like RED, FEC, RTX. So I wrote a spec recently, which was a flexible FEC, I think it was called. And it basically does RTX and FEC in the same thing. So and of course it's a pain because everyone who had done FEC 4 different ways is now wow, 5th way to do it. And this is more awesome because this one I claim can do more things. But of course now we need to see more people implement it, right?
Yeah,
so.
and just to clear for anyone who's not deeply into the...
Oh, your battery's probably running out.
Yeah, I think so. I was just going to clarify some of those terms like FEC and REMB and TMBR. A lot of the terms here, actually, I'll let Anthony cover it in a minute, but just in terms of controlling bandwidth to optimize video consumption. Just
Quality.
Video quality. I did actually want to have Dan touch on, the Chrome team did a couple things that caught the WebRTC community a little bit off guard. One in regards to controlling access to audio, which messing people up, and the other one is regarding screen share. So Dan, maybe you can explain those issues and talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so screen sharing. So historically in Chrome, you've had to install an extension that essentially enabled the screen share API. It was completely pointless, but that's another That's another topic. Yeah, it was anyway. So you needed an extension to be able to enable screen sharing. So that extension had to be sent up into the Google, into the Chrome store, and you needed to be able to install it from the Chrome store. Then they made it so that you could inline install it, so that it didn't take you away from the website, etc., and it made the user experience better. So now Chrome are stopping inline installations of extensions, and then they're creating this new API to be able to get access to display media such as screen sharing. Those two changes, and this new API doesn't require an extension. Those two changes don't match up in terms of when they're happening. So let's say you go to a website that you've always gone to, and you can share your screen today. Nothing's going to change for the foreseeable. But as a new user coming to appear in or whatever, I now have to go elsewhere to be able to install something, and it's just a massive mess. The whole plug-in free media in your browser is really easy. It's a mess. We will get to a good point, but it shouldn't have been this way in the first place.
Yeah, I'm curious, and so how are you handling that with?
Yeah, so interestingly, it seems though Microsoft is now doing the same API call that Google wants to do at least. So that's a step in one direction. But I noticed that when I went to do this, that it was all too familiar, and this is something that I've become numb. Since the first time that JavaScript was invented, there was already a problem. There was Netscape who invented it, and then Microsoft tried to implement it, and you couldn't even have a basic script without a bunch of tests to see which was which, and that kind of thing has been going on forever. It's kind of like the standards war or whatever, but at least like they're kind of coming together. But with screen share, everyone does it differently or doesn't do it. So then it's like you have incomplete feature set depending on which browser you use. But you have like to get screen sharing to even work on. So Firefox decided to do it the way that everyone said they should do it when they agreed. But there's holes in that too, because it kind of has like there's a dialog box that'll pop up. You can pick, do you want to do a screen or a window and stuff like that. And that's kind of cool, but it also doesn't, you may have to make your own questioning mechanism, some kind of pop-up box or whatever, which can be awkward if you already designed everything and then they changed it to do it that way. So you kind of like, what do I inject here in order to query for this, like, do you want a window or a screen? But then on Chrome, they have that built in as a UI that comes up when you call it. And the entire functions and how you do it are different. In fact, the parameters of the get user media to do it on Chrome are in line with before they started doing the Stream API stuff. So you have to actually have a whole different, like, if it's Chrome, like do this different way and do it the way you used to do it, but do all the new stuff the other way. And if it's Firefox, then do this completely different way.
Mostly adapter.js fixes most of that.
Yeah, it's coming together. That's kind of where I was getting to. Like and they're agreeing on doing a different function for it. So maybe there's light at the end of the tunnel. I guess Apple didn't even make it yet. They still don't even have device enumeration, I don't think. So like those are the ones. My dream is screen share being the same and device enumeration, even if it's bad, at least being there. Because you have all this other problems with that because stuff picks the wrong mic and there's no way to change it around. And the way they do it, there was one in Microsoft where if you didn't give, there's a permission catch-22 where the devices didn't have any names. So it would just show up, you couldn't tell what they were until you agreed, but you wouldn't know until you saw them, and like they acknowledged that. And so it's like, those are the kind of the finishing touches that stop it from being an experiment and make it into a product, because you expect every other app you ever touch like has amazing media choosing stuff. You go into somewhere in a preference screen and you can pick which camera you want to use anytime, even in the middle of the call. And obviously there's some challenges with that because of the security stuff, but there's ways to do it. But it's just like doing these things, they get complicated because it's all, JavaScript is asynchronous, and the device enumeration thing actually makes my head spin the way it's designed now.
But it's not really JavaScript, is it? It's the browsers. So this is why native, and this is why Electron and whatever else are all winning. Because I can go and make an app using Electron, and I can make it the right way. And because it gives me more control, I can do things the right way. And that's the same with native. The browsers are all different. Like, I can share my tab, or I can share my window, or I could share all of that, but with audio. Oh, but I can't do that in this browser.
Yes, forgot that one.
So, yeah, this is why native apps, however you get there, win. And it's really, it's sad for the web, as someone that loves the web and being able to just go to a website and go into a conference without having to download anything. That's amazing. But on the other hand, it's also really sad that all of these things are so different everywhere.
Yeah, so actually that's probably a good opportunity. Why don't we jump into mobile and native a little bit? Maybe we first to start out, Varun, within your customer base, and you monitor endpoints and endpoint types, like what percentage is native mobile versus browser-based?
Native is super high, as in I would say like it would be closer to 50-50, given our kind of demographic that we have, or that kind of apps, which tend to be majorly collaboration, or majorly contact center, which contact centers tend to be more like browser-based. The other thing that we've started to see is React Native. As in, we did see a presentation today about React Native and how they incorporate it. At least a year ago, Jitsi did it, and I think a lot of people have followed suit on that.
Okay.
Me included.
Yeah.
So we did our demo apps. We have libraries. We start to see JavaScript everywhere. So that's actually a good sign.
I probably should say, I mean, the biggest WebRTC user by far is Facebook Messenger. Presumably that's all since React. No, not React.
No,
at least on the mobile side, certainly all the social media apps, which are the primary, the largest WebRTC users, they're all native at least.
So of course, since you touched on Facebook, I'd just say like Facebook's one of the biggest culprits for slowing down WebRTC, because they're like the lib WebRTC they're using is like so old that they're like one of the reasons why some of the deprecation notices cannot be like some APIs cannot be deprecated because they rely so heavily on those. Even the unified plan, the fact that unified plan is within a flag and not like straight out, whichever way you want to call it, also seems like a disservice, because if that's the standard, why do I have to set plan equal to unified? At least even in the short term, you could have broken everything, and that would have made some people unhappy, and you know which people would be unhappy.
Big users. Well, I do want to stay on the native mobile topic, and maybe Anthony, you've got to deal with this too. So, what's your how do you think about supporting iOS and Android, or maybe even things like Electron?
I think there's a good chance that that is going to be the best use case for it, because there's like this imaginary scenario we all want to solve where we're at the coffee shop on the Wi-Fi, and then we walk outside on LTE, and then it solves the switches for us, and like no matter how shitty it is, you can see, it'll fix itself somehow through all the different mechanisms. So like, what I think is funny, because this is probably like the third year that I don't know if we've made any progress on the topic of this like native versus not thing, which is funny because what passes for native on mobile isn't really all that native either. It's just got less rules, so it's like, how can we bridge that gap? It's always about security, because that's why we can't have nice things on the internet, because every time you get a good idea, someone exploits it and they take it all away. So it's like just a matter of finding a place to expose those things in a way that someone's not going to turn it against you and make evil from it.
Security, as well as giving more control to the web APIs. Me and Varun had a very good conversation about this at ComCon, about how historically it's all been about protecting web developers. Like, how did you said it really well, like burning down your own house. Like, we needed protecting. You didn't say we needed protecting, just to be clear. It was viewed that web developers needed to be stopped from burning down their own house with security and everything else, and that's why there were less APIs necessarily available.
I think the common example for that is, like, for example, with real-time communication, right? You touched on the max bitrate, and there's a proposal like, why wouldn't we like give more control? And one of the biggest examples for this is that, oh, if you could set bit rates in JavaScript, you could do it in native apps, right? So why wouldn't you? The counterexample is, don't we have, like, what about ad networks, right? Because ad networks would set like I want to do like 100 megabits or 1 gigabit. So you give ad networks a lot of control. That might be true, but there are ways to stop those without actually like stopping the API from existing. Right. I think the API could exist. As in, we already have TCP, it's implemented. You have UDP, you have Quick, you have so many things that we've already implemented inside the internals of the systems that protect us. That, as in, you can create HTTP, you can create millions of HTTP sessions, right? You can open as many connections as you want. But the browser, of course, does something to limit that. And so I think from an API perspective, I think we can do a much better job now that WebRTC 1.0 is almost there, and we kind of agree on some of the mistakes that we made in the past. And we have ghosts of the past haunting us already. So I think in terms of API, we can, the second go around, I think we'll do a much better job of it.
Yeah, maybe real quick, Robbie, you can, I mean, you've worked on, I know you've done native projects. Maybe you can comment, what's your perspective on the state of native versus browser, and is native preferred? I mean,
well, I think that when it comes to actual usage, there's no question in my mind that mobile is by massively done compared to the web in terms of actual usage. And a lot of companies go to webrtc.org and pull it down directly, the code, and compile it themselves and do their own thing. And just the user experience that they can produce on a native app is just far superior than you can get on the mobile for the most part. And that's just, I think, the primary reason why. There's also a release cadence issue. You want to make sure that your app is stable, and when you tie yourself to the mobile and things break underneath your hood, you don't have control over that. You want to make sure that your app is continuously stable, and by downloading it yourself and using it, you get that stability. I should also mention, while I'm at it, there are, like you were mentioning, Microsoft not having the data channel, but we do have other projects. Like we have a fork of WebRTC.org, which actually has the data channel for the Microsoft platform, that you can produce Microsoft apps for the Microsoft Store. So there is stopgaps that they know about that fill some of those gaps that exist. So.
Yeah, I wish we had more time. If we had more time, I'd ask Dan to comment on progressive web apps. Maybe we can come back to that. Future WebRTC and kind of mobile web. And how that plays in, but sorry.
I'll be very quick. Ideally, it would open up loads of extra permissions, and it would be great. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon at all.
Okay. Two topics left I want to cover. We have about 4 minutes each or less, and not a whole lot of time for audience questions. One, I do want to touch on, because people here deploying stuff or want to deploy it. I do want to touch on what are some of the common deployment, scaling, production type issues that you guys are seeing, with comments on how to avoid or fix them. And what should people out there look out for as they're deploying their services?
Integrate
mobile connectivity, let's say, NATs, really bad NATs. Deploy a turn server.
With TLS.
With TLS, on port 443.
Yeah. And you mentioned Adapter.js, and Anthony mentioned Adapter.js. So I mean, from your perspective, Anthony, with free switch stuff, what do you recommend to people for when they're really beyond just doing their prototype system, playing around with it, getting ready to actually deploy it? What kind of guidelines do you give?
Make sure your server has bandwidth and access to a nice processor to live on. If you want any chance of having it always work, you pretty much have no choice but to use reverse tunnel proxies on your signaling channel, as well as like some kind of turn server, in order to normalize everything down to one port.
And you guys all use co-turn for your turn server?
Yeah, and I think it's important to say, even though FreeSwitch or Asterisk or Jitsi or whatever all have public IPs, a lot of people go, oh, well, turn servers are only needed when like our two peers are behind NATs, i.e. two browsers. That's not the case at all. You can absolutely get into a bad situation within a network. And so you absolutely need a turn server 100% of the time. It might only get used a little bit, but you need it. just want to make that a bit
Yeah.
clearer.
Any other?
I think it depends on scale. I think if you're really looking for global domination, like of course if your app's running only in the US or like geographically limited in some way, then you can choose your servers like statically. Like you can just say, oh, I want my servers in like these Amazon locations or these GCP locations or Azure or whatever cloud provider you're using. But as soon as you go global, I think that becomes like an interesting problem because you're trying to like make sure that you have good high quality connectivity, latency, you don't like hairpin all over the place as in two people in
Between those regions as well.
Yeah.
Between your servers.
Also between your servers and it's on operating question, right? So you have like, oh, if you have only 2% of your global usage in Australia, do you put a server in Australia? Those are all interesting questions. And I think people have to look at this in a very clear and systematic manner. You can do it by yourself. You can use, you can use us. You can use some other platforms. But I think that's one of the things that what we see when we start monitoring people's sessions is that people do not take that into account while designing the systems. So a lot of this happens after the fact. And then you're actually, if you have high engagement already, you're actually running against like a ticking time bomb, right? So you have to like then deploy all this stuff.
Okay.
Where did I, very quickly, where did I hear Google has the most entry points into its network, even where it hasn't got its core network? And so Google Cloud theoretically is the best place to house your media servers because you get into their private network as quickly as possible. I can't remember where I read that, but that's something else to consider. Google Cloud might not be the best place for your application, potentially, but getting your media into private network as quickly as possible is a big thing.
Yeah, they just launched in Finland, so I think they've got like 8 points of presence in Europe, which is formidable because Amazon has just 2 or 2.5. So like there are of course Azure and there are other people who are doing a lot better in terms of cloud providing.
All right, I want to make sure we touch on our last topic, which is what's next for WebRTC, and thank you, Robin, for being quiet. I'm going to give you several minutes to touch on that one. So we talked a lot about WebRTC 1.0, what's kind of in it or not in it, or might be. Can you talk a little bit about what's next? What's after 1.0?
Sure. And because 1.0 is trying to reach stability, they need still an avenue to be able to innovate because there's a lot of people who are wanting to do some interesting stuff out there. I'm going to list some of the ideas. So. There has been other groups that have opened. For example, you mentioned one of them already, which has to do with the screen sharing working group that they're trying to define APIs like user media for that. ORTC has also become a place where innovation is happening. So Quick, for example, is being brought into ORTC spec for this reason, so that we can have an avenue to innovate on this. SVC, there has been a proposal to bring it to WebRTC, but it's not really because they're drawing the line in the sand for simulcast. Is it going to make it? Is it not? It's questionable, but ORTC has had it kind of since day one, so that's another area that's really important. And RTP data, which I think in the world of SFUs is going to be really important to be able to have real-time data for spatial data. For example, if you're doing HoloLens or something like that, you want to be able to have that spatial data. Gaming engines often need to be able to transport like this movement here to this coordinate here in real time. They want to coordinate it with media. That's really super important. And having your SFU being able to distribute it is important. There's a whole community of people looking into AI, and you're one of those people. So a lot of people have downloaded ML Kit, the Google's Kit, to be able to do real-time streaming processing of media and how we can work it with artificial intelligence. So that's a huge area of exploration. People are also exploring things that you wouldn't think they need to, like congestion control. How can we make congestion control better? So there's REMB already and Timber, but there's new stuff that Transport CC rather that they're trying to propose new ideas. How can we make media and data cooperate better? That's one of the pushes for Quick as well as quicker setup time. And they're even doing things like people are trying to do things like with Node.js, where you can have congestion control feedback coming in from Node.js modules, which are feeding SVC-based media. And SVC allows you to encode the media once, but decide what bit rate you actually want to transmit on. So they have the congestion control providing feedback to Node.js, so Node.js can make the decision, oh, now we're going to do a higher bit rate or lower bit rate because somebody's on a good but bad network or in a bad network. So these things are really important. If you can imagine Netflix, which has to encode their media 5 or 6 times, that's really expensive. Well, they can just encode it once and then have something like Node.js be able to decide, I want to stream at a different bit rate and stuff like that. So those are all things that people are looking at. And recording in the cloud, and so there's lots of innovation happening, despite the fact that we're going towards standardization and closing that door. So
yeah, so I wish we had like 3 hours because I could easily spend it, but we're out of time. I did want to. I think we have 1 minute left. So if there was any like really pressing audience questions,
I have a question. When's fax coming to WebRTC?
RTP data, it could be there.
No.
Yeah. So I'd say, why don't we like formally close the panel at the end of the day, and people want to go. Maybe I'll ask the panelists just to like stick around here for a couple of minutes, and if people have questions out there, they can just come up and we'll just don't move, just stay where you are. But yeah, that was great. I mean, there's obviously so much to WebRTC. I do want to emphasize we make it sound really complicated because we're going deep and talking about a bunch of problems and headaches. But for most people, I mean, I think you'd all agree it's not really. There's plenty of people doing WebRTC, high capacity, high scale. It's working. There certainly are headaches, but there's many different levels to it. So don't get scared off. But be realistic. Like if you want to get into the weeds, there's a lot of weeds.
Right. And if you want to learn more about the next steps of WebRTC 1.0. We've been writing blog posts for the last 3-4 months on what the evolution is. I shared some with you folks before. Just go to callstats.io/blog, and you should just find stuff there.
And I guess very quickly, Josh Culp from the Asterisk project tweeted last week, just because you know VoIP and you know SIP and you know typical telephony media does not mean you can deploy WebRTC and succeed. It's an entirely different beast that you have to go and learn. So don't be afraid of asking.
All right, I'm gonna stop. Thank you.
Big round of applause for Chad Hart and our panelists.